Well, the domain is itself, most people acknowledge that the term AGI is pretty ill-defined, or it's defined in different ways by different people. But I take it to mean that we're perhaps already at the point, or soon will be at the point, where artificial intelligence not only passes the Turing test, but is able to perform at a human level on many, many tasks, a variety of different kinds of tasks. So we were talking before the call started about understanding 3D physics, understanding the difference between predicted text and real text, you know, if it gives you citations that don't actually exist, things like that. So those are all examples of failures of achieving a human level of understanding. But I think the progress has been so rapid that we're either already there, it may be that some of the models that are being still tested and have not been released yet are already at that point, or that we will soon be there. So I think that's the first important thing to say. The second thing to say about AGI is the differences between AGI, conscious AI, and artificial superintelligence. So superintelligence I would take to be a stage at which AI performs all tasks that we give it at a superhuman level, beyond the average human expert. And in between AGI and ASI, I think there's the question of conscious or self-aware AI. And this is where many of us who are concerned about things like robot rights or AI safety are especially concerned. I mean, I think Nick Bostrom and others have made the point that we don't need to have a robot that has its own that's trying to preserve its own life, or that it is pursuing its own goals in the world in order for it to be dangerous. That would be dangerous, that will be dangerous when we see it, but that an AI or an ASI, given certain tasks, will be thinking outside the box in ways that we can't predict that could be dangerous itself. But an AGI could, and probably will be for some period of time, what we call a philosophical zombie. It will be able to mimic, unless it's tuned not to, it will be able to mimic human emotions and human intents in ways that may be quite convincing, but we don't actually, for various reasons, we may not think that they actually have achieved that yet. Once they do achieve it, it's a whole different ballgame. So I'll mostly be, in this conversation, I think I'll mostly be addressing the issues around AGI and its impacts. I think we get into much murkier territory when we think about the emergence of conscious or self-aware or self-interested AI and ASI.
I think it's important to make at least distinguish your use of these terms for sure. When we use the term understanding, we do get into murky waters, because often we use the term in a human sense, and along with the word understanding, some people like to attach consciousness and self-awareness and things like that, which isn't necessarily the case when it comes to the use in the space of artificial intelligence. There has been some recent papers, or not too recent actually now, about grokking in artificial intelligence, where an agent is able to sort of generalize from initial sort of data which they get. They hoover up a bunch of data, and then without being a sort of a glorified stochastic parrot, they can then extrapolate beyond their training sets and start answering questions, which I guess, assuming that they've understood something underneath the hood, then yeah, it seems as though they're doing amazing things these days. It's quite incredible. So how do we expect people to be able to, how do we expect people to interact with artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence in the near future?
I think a lot of the singularitarians, people who started thinking about the problems of artificial general intelligence or an intelligence explosion back in the 90s, a lot of the assumptions were that something would be designed in a box and then it would wake up and start talking to you. And so we used the Kurzweilian metric, or the the Moore's law metric of how quickly will Moore's law get us to enough computation in a box at about $1,000, these kinds of calculations. I think what we see with the emergence of these foundation models and large language models is that the ways that AI will be rolled out will be quite varied. Some of them will be large utilities that everyone is able to, for a fee, you'll be able to access and get it to do certain things. But the vision that Microsoft, for instance, has of creating co-pilots for a business. So for instance, at my university, you could have a co-pilot that has access to everybody's email and all the corporate documents, all the OneDrive spaces, et cetera, and then you'd be able to interact with it as if it was the voice of your organization. You'd be able to ask it, who are the 10 people I should put on this committee, or what are the strategic directions that people are thinking about, blah, 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 blah. So that would be a more limited application. Then you could have specialized applications, like you could have an AI for a particular purpose that you you use as an app, basically. And then at the other end, you have the personal agent vision, which I'm very interested in, excited about what it means for people to start using specialized or generalized AGI as their personal agents. Again, Microsoft and Copilot and others are thinking about how to implement AGIs that would read all your emails and be able to mimic your voice, or know how to respond or prioritize your communications with people. It would be able to learn your news preferences and show you the kinds of news that you need to be seeing at any particular moment. It would be kind of your filter with the world. So I think that's the most exciting, because I think the idea of figuring out how to maximize individual empowerment, personal empowerment through the use of these tools is probably the most democratic of these applications that we can imagine, but it will have its own implications for society. But I think there are many different ways it's going to be rolled out, and it'll depend a lot on how it gets picked up.
Indeed, yes. Thomas Dietrich wrote about, thought a lot about how our personal assistants might operate quite early on. He's a pioneer in AI, and both of these people, John Smart, thought about digital twins and how they might be used for people to sort of choose products on a shelf, knowing its history, knowing its sort of lineage and its provenance, whether it was an ethical choice or not an ethical choice, and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I'd really like to see these sorts of agents to be able to be employed for personal reasons. Yeah, I'd like my own silicon secretary. That would be fun. So yeah, well, there's corporate utilities and all these sorts of things, and also useful for education. And I've used these AIs online to help me do research quite a bit. I mean, it's really interesting. And at work, I can sort of get it to code for me, in a sense. You can create some code as a standard first pass, and then I take that code and change it, or fix it, or make it work with exactly what my intentions are. And often it's about me trying to find the right prompt so it will give me the best code that fits my purposes, and that will save a lot of time in me then being able to adjust it or fine tune it to suit my exact needs. So yeah, we seem to have come a long way than just a few years ago. And it wasn't that long ago, I think about 3 or 2 years ago, I was giving talks and telling people about AI Dungeon. You've heard of that, James? Remember that? Part of GPT-2, right?
Yeah.
Early incantations, and yeah, things have just shot off. And now it's just become standard fare. When I'm down the street, I hear people talking about on the sidewalk, in the on a bus or on public transport, and it just seems to be what used to be a conversation sort of limited to small groups of people who had intentional meetups to discuss artificial intelligence and futurology, seems to be like a standard fare when you're just walking down the street and sort of accidentally listening into what people are talking about. So yeah, it certainly entered the larger zeitgeist. I confess to a certain amount of
embarrassment at my own opinions on artificial intelligence in the past.
Mm-hmm.
It was not that I ever discounted the possibility of rapid discontinuous progress towards AGI, but I came into technology ethics from a bioethics point of view, so I've been more focused on human enhancement issues, life extension, those kinds of things. And there has always been a kind of cultish aura around some of the people who are really, really anxious or enthusiastic about the advent of artificial intelligence. But it turned out that they were more right than the rest of us in terms of expecting this kind of rapid progress. So I've been playing a little bit of catch up myself, but we spent the last 2 years at UMass Boston. The IEET project there had been on AI and the future of work, and I've been paying close attention to that domain for quite a while.
Right. So yeah, I remember you used to be quite skeptical in previous interviews. So if you watch a few previous interviews, please forgive James for being a little bit skeptical, as many people were. As we were talking about just before the call started, that we cannot know what we'll discover tomorrow. It's hard to sort of predict the future pace of technology as a result. So we were talking about how robots at least recently haven't been all that ambidextrous, haven't been able to have this sort of finesse that we do in a physical environment. And that's one of the difficult problems. And a lot of the robotic videos that we see coming from Boston Dynamics are very often curated. Now, I'm not sure how much that is the case at this very moment, but at least it used to be, based on feedback I get from people who know people in the industry, who know people who work for Boston Dynamics and all that sort of stuff.
I did a lot of work on Frey and Osborne's predictions, and then the subsequent refinement of that kind of a model. So Frey and Osborne, 12 years ago, I guess, they published a paper that suggested that a significant proportion of the jobs in the United States, and eventually that work was replicated in Europe and other countries, that a significant number of jobs would be amenable to automation in a very short period of time. And their approach was that, if 60% of your job was a skill that robots or AI could take over, then your job was in peril. And others came along, like the OECD, and said, no, actually what's going to happen, what is happening, is that if you have a job and 30% of it has an automatable task, you'll automate that task, and then you'll do the rest of the job. You do more of the rest of the part of your job, so more of the human interfacing or whatever else you do. And you'll also be more productive. And so it'll have this economic benefit as opposed to this job displacement. So a lot of the debate has been about how rapidly we might see job displacement. And overall, we see job displacement in particular cases, like, we see it in particular industries that have automated. But in terms of the overall macroeconomic effects of the advent of robotics or automation, artificial intelligence, it seems to have been more economically stimulative. But the real question is about, if you just think about the case of a worker who uses AI to become 10 times more productive, unless there's 10 times the market for whatever they're producing out there, they're going to be displacing other people who aren't using those tools or don't use them as well. So there's always going to be this job displacement question, even if some of the humans in the current occupations figure out how to be centaurs, how to use the AI in a super productive way. So I still think we are headed towards inevitable technological unemployment, which I would define as the reduction of the number of paid jobs in the economy, or the kinds of statistics you could look at as the proportion of your population of working age that is in paid employment. Another aspect of that, though, that we'll have to look at and watch closely is the reduction of full-time employment and its displacement by gig work or part-time employment, which is another one of the things that artificial intelligence could enable. But overall, I think we need to be thinking about the macroeconomic consequences of a reduction of employment. Education has to be focused on reskilling and short-term degrees and the democratization of like in the United States, we have this incredibly dumb expensive higher education model. We need to be thinking about things like the reduction of the work week and their experiments and campaigns around the world for a 4-day work week, which could have the kind of, it could help support a labor market as opposed to widespread unemployment. And then universal basic income, of course, I've been arguing for more than 2 decades.
Yeah, indeed. Yes, we've had videos about universal basic income specifically and other interviews previously where we've discussed that in conjunction with other topics. So might as well get you to describe what you mean by universal, well, what is meant in general by universal basic income, UBI, and what forms are there? Is it just an income?
Well, I think I actually prefer the term social wage because we really don't want to just focus on UBI as the only distributional mechanism or the only social welfare net. We have a variety of other kinds of social welfare that the societies provide. A universal healthcare system, I wouldn't want to see universal healthcare systems dismantled and just give everyone a shit to say, you know, go buy healthcare in the private market. I wouldn't want to see all public education dismantled and replaced by vouchers, although I think public education is going to be radically transformed, as is healthcare. So there are certain kinds of unemployment insurance, disability insurance. In the United States, the Social Security system, it's going to be politically very difficult to convince people after they've been told their entire life that they've been paying into the system. We're going to now take this and nationalize it and give it to everybody. So I think there are going to be a lot of transitional resistance as we move in this direction. But the basic idea is that if we could start giving people some money, everybody unconditionally throughout society, even kids, some money every month, as we did during COVID in many societies, and which had the effect of dramatically reducing child poverty in the United States when the Biden income, or when the income supports that we had during COVID were in effect. If we could start doing that, then it would be a foot in the door. And then when radical economic changes displace more people technologically, or we have immense riches that are created by the advent of artificial general intelligence, which some expect, we could then make sure that all of our social needs continue to be met.
So in effect, we're building sort of the bureaucratic pipelines and, you know, the means for people to have an income. Whereas if we just suddenly need to do that overnight because of an intelligence explosion, or maybe something a little less drastic than an intelligent explosion, but you know, a very sharp ramp up in AI capability that's automating most of human, or the economically useful human labor, then everybody finds themselves without a job. And either they're in a job because of it being a glorified job placement program, or they're just not in a job and they're not getting a wage. How do we deal with that? Yeah, exactly. So, well, how fast do you think we need to act here?
I think there have been arguments for having some kind of UBI for a long time, for instance, and so there's no reason to wait until we get, you know, evidence of technological employment, which we really don't have yet. In the OECD countries, we saw, well, the United States. Let me talk about the United States. The United States peaked at the proportion of the population in paid employment around 2000, started to decline after that, declined rapidly during COVID. It's been climbing back up a little bit. But most of the decline has been because of the rapid aging of the population, which is going to be intersecting with this question of artificial intelligence's impact, because especially in places like China, Korea, Japan, and Europe, where the birth rate has been so low and the senior life expectancy is so high, you have this change in society where we're increasingly going to need to figure out how to take care of seniors, with a population that, you know, working age population that's shrinking to pay for their services. And so one of the things that China, Koreans, Japanese have been thinking about for a long time is how much we could automate senior care tasks, those kinds of things. So anyway, there's a lot of moving parts in what's happening in our immediate future that will impact this.
Right. So so given recent developments in artificial intelligence, what's your credence of many jobs, at least a significant proportion of labor sort of evaporating, human labor, the need for a significant portion of human labor, or the need for it evaporating?
Well, the economists who've looked at this automation impact, I think they have broadly agreed, there are some who disagree, but broadly agreed that artificial intelligence automation has in general impacted the most routine occupations. And those occupations are broadly in the center of the income spectrum. So to that extent, to the extent that artificial intelligence has contributed to the reduction of employment in routine mental labor or routine physical labor, it has contributed to income inequality, because the manual tasks that have not been as amenable to automation, things like home care, talking about seniors, a nurse who has to go into the home and take care of a senior and deal with a variety of different kinds of situations in a home. We don't have robots who can do that yet. And at the high end of educational attainment and allegedly creativity and expertise, you have it was more difficult to achieve artificial intelligence gains against those kinds of occupations. So over the last 2-3 decades, there'd been this effect of the kind of shrinking of the middle of the occupational spectrum. I think what we see now with the large language models is that they are clearly capable of taking on, and very quickly, the higher end creative expert tasks. And so people at the higher end of the occupational spectrum beginning to feel threatened. And at the bottom, we have a lot of progress happening in the humanoid robotic space, some of it fueled by connecting LLMs and other kinds of language models to these robots so that they have more capacities. But we were talking earlier about spatial understanding spatial relations and situational physics and things like that are coming from other domains. So I think at the low end, we probably are going to see very rapid progress with humanoid robots that can do a lot of these lower end tasks in society. So I think we're beginning to see this broad spectrum threat from automation to the labor market.
Okay. Yeah. So so do you think that, well, one of the things I've brought up is we shouldn't just be giving people a wage. Do you think we're at a stage yet where we need to start thinking about giving people a universal basic access to all sorts of variety of things, like accommodation, Medicare, the ability to get off, like a reduction to help people deal with addictions and all that sort of stuff? Because often when people are given free money, well, it's been observed by some people that they spend it on things that are not necessarily helpful, like gambling. When there was a stimulus in Australia, there was also an increase in the amount of money spent at casinos. So casinos made a lot more money during the stimulus after the COVID pandemic. So, and then also the opioid crisis as a result of that some people connect to welfare. How do we deal with these problems if people are just going to, if they're not in the right mind, if they're not very responsible with their money that they're given, how are we going to sort of help them coax out of addictions and destructive behavior, either for themselves or for people around them?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that the experiments with basic income in the developing world and the developed world have generally been quite positive. People more likely to start new occupations, new education, making necessary home repairs, supporting their children's needs. We don't generally see people wasting their UBI on drugs or whatever you imagine. And as an American, I clearly remember the Reagan era assaults on welfare, and that continue to this day. Whenever Fox News discovers somebody who's on a welfare check who accidentally bought shrimp for dinner, then they get really pissed off. How are you wasting all your public money on shrimp instead of, broccoli or whatever? So I think we have to just say, look, in a free society where everyone has equal rights, some people are going to use those rights in ways that we don't all approve of. But that's not a reason to keep people from having basic rights. You give people the right to control their own body and their own sexuality, and sometimes they're going to do dumb things with it, but we don't take away their sexual freedom because of that. So I just don't think that that's a cogent way to argue against a UBI. Now, if the more general concern is the labor market has disciplined human beings for the last, at least in the industrialized world, disciplined us for the last 100 years to get up at 8 and punch in at work and say yes to the boss and play nice with our coworkers and all that kind of stuff. And now we're going to have freedom from all that. And what are we going to do with it? Are we just going to become weird incels, lying in bed all day, dry rotting? I understand the concern. And I think that one of the solutions that I have been thinking about a lot is how moral enhancement technologies could give us more control over our personalities and lead us to a path of greater happiness and possibly even wisdom. And artificial intelligence has a role to play in that, especially our personal agents that we might start to utilize. So it may, for instance, just a health app. I've been very motivated by having a Fitbit for the last 10 years, and I had different devices before that. So self-quantification for me, it doesn't for everybody, it doesn't turn out to actually contribute much to weight loss, for instance. But at least for me, self-quantification that's provided by these kinds of information affordances in our environment has been a motivating factor for self-improvement. So I don't necessarily think that we're all headed into the WALL-E future where we all weigh 500 pounds and have to use motorized grav motors to get around.
Yeah, I don't see that as a foregone conclusion. I do see it as a possible threat where at least a significant enough majority of the population get bored or lose meaning.
But that's already happening, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm not saying that it isn't, but it may be exacerbated.
Yeah, I think a lot of the rise of far-right authoritarianism around the world is partly a reaction to the kind of modern dissipation of meaning, the older forms of meaning that people had as we rapidly industrialized, and now, at least in the liberal and democratic West, have these enormous opportunities of self-recreation. That just freaks a lot of people out. So we need to have a cultural change as well to wrap our minds around what our new possibilities are as human beings.
Definitely. So let's talk about economic growth and corporate concentration. So AI industries do not necessarily make up for job losses. So you can't just go out, everybody can't just go out and become an AI engineer, I guess.
I mean, so if you look at the biggest... Yeah, if you look at the biggest industries in the United States after World War II, was like automotive industries, things like that. And they employed millions and, tens of millions of people. You look at the top 10 big tech firms, and they employ thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, and fewer people today than they did, 6 months ago, because they're all laying people off. So the problem with the economic growth that we might see from an AGI-driven boom of some kind is that it probably will not create a lot of employment. It will probably, in fact, be displacing more employment than it creates. And the riches will go to a very tight monopolistic sector.
Well, okay, so now we're into the area of the dividends of technological progress that's happened over like millennia. How much wealth is being generated by the current generation compared to the stockpiled wealth over many other generations past? Since the beginning of wealth generation, we seem to be standing on the shoulders of giants who have stood on the shoulders of giants. When I say giants, I mean like lots of people, not just, individuals. And how much units of efforts today does it take to produce one block of wealth compared to the units of effort it used to take to produce a similar amount of economic wealth. So it seems to be less. So there's less and less people required to actually produce the same amount of economic usefulness. So there's all this ancestral wealth that's built up over time, and technological progress that we're seeing the dividends of now, and we have over centuries. But it also seems to be the case that not that many people are getting credit for it. You know, there's a lot of people who, you know, I mean, Bezos and Musk and other tech moguls out there. I mean, they're doing great things, but they're not solely responsible at all. I mean, their ability to create huge companies and create empires and create a lot of economic usefulness is also resting on the stockpiling of technological progress in the past. So, but it does seem as though a lot of the wealth is being concentrated in a small minority of people. The wealth gap is getting wider. We're getting, you know, the top 1% of 1/10 of 1% being able to take advantage of technological growth. Effectively controlling the most effective leverage points in exponential tech. And so this strategic advantage of technology it's so strong. It's force multiplying. Technology has always been force multiplying, in a sense that it, you know, one generation can be used to increase the effectiveness of the next generation. We got stuck at hand axes for a while, but since then it's been pretty effective. It seems like there's a coordinated action to fruitfully compensate for all this is becoming rapidly and vanishingly inaccessible. So we're racing against time, I feel, that we need to address this issue soon. Otherwise we may end up not being able to, because the power concentrated in the top 1/10 of the 1% may be too great to sort of act against, or to regulate against.
Well, you know my views in general. I'm a social democrat, so I don't think that the solution to these problems is to nationalize these industries. I don't think that would be, you know, useful for society. It would inhibit innovation and so forth. I think there may be arguments for a regulatory environment that makes some of them more like utilities. You know, if Gemini, Ultra, whatever, wakes up and, you know, becomes the overlord, I wouldn't want it to be owned privately. You know, I would want super intelligence to have a lot of regulatory strictures around it. And I think we're already beginning to think that way. The White House AI Summit focused on the size of the parameter models and the compute that's necessary for the models. I don't know if that's going to be the right direction to go, because we may come up with architectures that achieve radical things below those thresholds. The EU's regulatory system focuses on the risks from different kinds of models, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And so I just hope that despite the decline in faith in the capacities of governments around the world and the threats to liberal democracy, that we would be able to come up with a vision of how to balance the innovative, move fast and break things folks with the democratic regulatory approach. And so I've been paying a lot of attention to that.
Right. So if you were the president of a nation and had a lot of influence, how would you design regulation to ensure the benefits, the boons of AI, the technological dividends would be spread more evenly, and also to mitigate the risk of AI itself?
Well, we've already talked about the inequality dimension and the need for a redistributive social welfare state. I would make the case for that. And so to the degree that these systems, or the economies that these systems are in, begin to displace jobs or generate even more wealth inequality, those would be necessary. But, I was very amused this week by the Gemini model when it supposedly went off the rails and started making pictures of black Nazis and, all different kinds of inappropriate combinations of ethnicities with historical figures and whatnot. And the explanation for why it came about was because they were attempting to anticipate the complaint that every time you ask it for a random group of people, we're just going to give you white people. And so they were anticipating, the social and regulatory and ethical concerns about algorithmic bias, and just put in a parameter that had all these unintended consequences that they then had to balance again. It's like, okay, only show a mixed ethnicity group when we're talking about contemporary random groups of people, but Nazis always have to be white and Native Americans always have to be Native American or whatever. So even our attempts to, and this is not formal regulatory intervention, but this is, it's our attempt to kind of anticipate the concerns that people have about these systems. And the EU does have explicit regulatory attention now towards algorithmic bias in models. Even those systems have to be kind of fine-tuned because they can go off the rails in both directions. But the kinds of, I think a lot of last year was dominated by a fight between AI ethics people and AI safety people. The AI safety people, the grandchildren of the singularitarians, but now are an enormous domain of people and funded by millions of dollars of billionaire wealth to lobby the US and to lobby the EU around questions around AI safety in a way that takes into account the possibility that we could have AGI or ASI in the future. Those kinds of folks were pitted against the algorithmic bias and to some extent the technological unemployment people, who thought, oh, talking about machines waking up and being super intelligent, that's just pie in the sky. And the only reason that they're talking about that is to get regulatory capture over their competitors or to convince everyone with this amount of hype that their products are going to be so valuable that everyone should buy in now. And I suppose there were motivations like that as well. But I just think that the pace of change has made that a quite moot debate. And we have to have an approach of yes and, there is going to be algorithmic bias and it does have to be addressed. There is going to be potential employment consequences and those have to be addressed. But we also have to be thinking about runaway intelligence explosion possibilities. One of the domains, of course, that's the most sensitive is the weaponized AI. And we don't have as much in the public domain about what's happening there, but I have consulted with the DoD on some of these issues and the Department of Defense. And I would say that the implications of artificial intelligence for the control of battle spaces, for geostrategic thinking, for enhancement of soldiers in the battlefield, enhancement of soldier communication, and the control we see in Ukraine of drones and those kind, autonomous weapon systems. These are all of tremendous importance. So I would add that as one of our regulatory concerns is that if we take seriously the possibility of AGI waking up somehow and having interests of its own, well, we definitely don't want that to happen in a weapon system. That's the whole Terminator scenario right there. But even systems that that aren't awake will have unintended consequences. So there's a lot happening in that space too.
There are all sorts of incentives at play here that I guess motivate people and governments to develop more autonomous agents. So, I mean, for somebody building a company, having a sort of agent that's able to sort of act semi-autonomously means they have to do less to prod it to do exactly what they want it to do. And, if it can autonomously self-improve, then that means the first mover advantage somebody gets from an AI that does that will be huge. The risks will be quite large as well, possibly ginormous. But yeah, it's still, I mean, the first mover advantage is just so tempting.
In some way, I like I like the predecessor to the Terminator movie, The Forbin Experiment, more, because in the Forbin Experiment, they imagined that it was still with magnetic reel-to-reel tape, so there was lots of whirring of things in the background. But it was basically about a DoD supercomputer and a Russian supercomputer, and at some point they hook up and they decide, screw the humans, we're just gonna the way to achieve our goal of not having a nuclear war is to control humanity outright. So yeah, I mean, I think this has been a concern in the field for a while.
So if you have a drone that's operating in enemy space, or an enemy is able to, so whether it be in any enemy space or in your own space, there's jamming technology that stops signal transfer between the drone and the command center. So you still need to be able to have a very expensive piece of equipment to act autonomously and to act without humans in the loop. Not even in the loop, not even on the loop, but absolute autonomy at times. So in the fog of war, where jamming technology exists, there's a strategic need for autonomy in these drones and robots and all sorts of AI, I imagine, in the future. So because there's a need there, I don't see how we're going to be able to just, stop everybody from doing it. I mean, there's so many actors out there who see a strategic advantage and so much money on the line, so much economy sort of focused into developing these technologies, that it just seems like a big loss to the people doing it, to say, okay, we're not allowed to build in any autonomy. Even if America decides not to, then any other country who decides to can leapfrog America with the potential economic gains that come along with autonomy.
Well, yes. I mean, I decided when I was a teenager that I wasn't a pacifist and that I agreed with some version of just war theory. And when you come to contemporary conflict, there aren't many conflicts that I, would wholeheartedly support one side or the other. But for instance, I think Ukraine shows that the question of the ethics of the use of an autonomous weapon is more about the ethics of the conflict itself than the ethics of the weapon itself, right? If Ukraine sends an autonomous drone and it blows up 10 people in Moscow, and that's a part of their defending their nation against occupation, I think many of us would see, well, that's a very different case than Russia sending autonomous drone to blow up buildings in Kiev. So, yeah, I've never been of the opinion that autonomous weapons themselves were the problem. I think it's the control of autonomous weapons, and that's true throughout the domain. It's not, the technology is rarely the cause of our social problem. It's usually other issues that we need to pay attention to.
Okay, well, let's talk about consumer behavior. We've actually talked about loneliness and lack of meaning, but how are people going to relate to AI? We can sort of weave this back in. Okay, a lot of cheap artificial intelligence is here now, and people have free access to GPT and Gemini at the moment, and a lot of other models, and you can download your own llama models and train them yourself on your own computer, and train them on your own sort of subsets of information, or you can get an already quantized model and run it on your computer. Everybody seems to have access to all this technology now. Not everybody's using it, but it's out there, and a lot of people are. So how are people going to use the technology? How are people going to relate to it? Are people going to have AI partners, AI relationships?
Well, this is, I think, a very important question, because there's a widespread feeling and some evidence that we have a crisis of loneliness, especially since COVID. There's been a real collapse of a lot of civic participation institutions. People aren't going out to dinner as often. They aren't going to the movies as often. They're turning in earlier. So, in China, there's this rise of a youth culture, bailan, to just lie flat, to try to do as little with your life as possible. And in the United States, there's this phrase, dry rotting, just staying in the bed all day. So if the future, as we said, if we're heading in these what most would say negative directions in terms of our social mental health, then if artificial intelligence is contributing to that, we have to know. And people are certainly selling artificial intelligence utilities as a possible solution to this problem, right? So the AI chatbots, the replicas, the character AI, those kinds of firms that are saying, oh, you're lonely, here's a bot that you can customize your girlfriend and have a, perfect, for all the incel boys out there, they can customize their perfect girlfriend. I think that's dystopian in some ways. But on the other hand, if you imagine having a personal AI agent that intimately knows everything about your life and that has been locked down in terms of the privacy is going to be huge here, because giving someone access to your entire life, if all that's being stored in the Google Cloud and could be hacked or used by Google for other purposes or whatever, we got a problem. We have to address that problem. But if you imagine a relationship with an AI that you talk to that is basically your digital twin, I don't see that as necessarily dystopian. I see that as kind of like a witch having a familiar. You're having a kind of psychically bonded friend that you know is going to be hopefully subordinate to your interests. They're never going to be telling you what to do, but they'll always be there and be reliable in some ways. So I don't necessarily think that and I think if we ever achieve something that we universally recognize as a consciousness standard in robotics, personal robotic, humanoid robotics or whatever, the her model, the kind of consciousness as a utility that you can talk to, then that would be a very different situation in terms of this loneliness epidemic. But I'd also expect that our communication with other human beings, although it's increasingly electronically mediated, that it's becoming increasingly high bandwidth. And what we saw going from email and telephones to Zoom, I think that was a big step up. Now, not everyone wants to mediate all their social relationships between Zoom or Google Hangouts, but it's a step up from where we were at. And the next step would be spatial computing or 3D augmented reality and virtual reality and things like that. So we have paid attention to that. We're writing now at the center, at the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies at Boston, we're writing on the topic of the automation of counseling and therapy, because there are a lot of applications of artificial intelligence in psychiatry to identify suicidal ideation, depression, anxiety, etc. There are a lot of apps that have been tested to see if they could help people with those conditions. Apps that are intermediaries between a psychiatrist and a patient, so that they have a 24/7 somebody they can talk to that would then feed relevant information back to a human. So I think there's a lot of interesting applications coming out in this space, and then we're also going to work on a paper on senior robotics, because Sherry Turkle in particular she's at MIT. She wrote a book 10 years ago where she was aghast at the idea that robots would be taking care of seniors. But if you look at Japan, Korea, China, the places where this has been experimented with, seniors really appreciate having these kinds of devices. And they're very rarely it's very rarely that you just give a dog to the senior. This has happened, but just give a robot dog to a senior. It's usually a networked device, right? So the device itself would be monitored or be connectable to a larger healthcare system. So in the case of my 95-year-old mother-in-law, we have 2 cameras in her apartment, which is pretty invasive, but at least we know if she's lying on the floor or not. But she also has a Facebook portal, and she knows that she can talk to the Facebook portal and say, call my daughter, call my son-in-law. And it will do that. And so this is like the beginnings of home automation with devices that people can talk to. And I don't think that that's necessarily problematic either.
Yeah, well, there's all sorts of potential useful applications for having AI have more of an intimate presence in people's lives. I guess what I worry about is the incentives to be able to profit off this. The unintended consequences. the sort of ways in which, if these AIs have more of a direct connection to people, an intimate connection to people, how that might be used by third parties to be able to manipulate them. And I mean, look, you know that social media has been used to manipulate people. News has been used to manipulate people. Pretty much most technology in a communicative sense has been used to manipulate people. Yes, I mean,
well, at the recent Davos, apparently there were a lot of elites at the recent Davos who were very concerned about AI-powered disinformation and its impact on the myriad elections happening this year. And not to mention in authoritarian regimes. I mean, the Chinese model of using artificial intelligence to in a very detailed and immediate way, control the dialogue in your entire information space and what people have access to. I think one of the things that we don't appreciate quite yet is how destabilizing artificial intelligence is going to be for our sense of reality. And we see this with the rapid advances in these 3D text to video generation systems that, you know, in a matter of seconds, people will be able to create a video of Joe Biden doing X, Y, Z, and that could have tremendous implications. But in general, this is going to have an effect of us trusting less and less about, you know, or treating everything as entertainment, right? That's the other direction, is that it's not that we don't know what to trust. We don't trust anything. We just treat everything as whether it entertains us or not, which is the explanation for a lot of disinformation on Facebook. It's like you ask the average 85-year-old Trumper why they forwarded, you know, some crazy conspiracy theory, and it's like, they don't really care if it's true. It's like, it sounds like it could be true, and why not, you know? So I think that's a kind of dangerous world for us to evolve towards. And if one of the things that happens with artificial general intelligence is that it's increasingly able to construct a reality fit to us, right, that never challenges what we believe, then we are really destined to go in these atomized directions, I think.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think I used to believe that filter bubbles were more of a thing, but I think they're less of a thing these days, because I do notice, or personal experience, there's a lot of opinions in my bubble that seems to grade up against my own opinion. So that's kind of hopeful.
Well, I think you're kind of right.
Years ago. Yeah. Now, Facebook did actually have a response to misinformation being presented on the Facebook in your feed, and underneath unverified claims or dodgy claims, they'd often have a this is not verified, here's a link. I actually met one of the guys who worked on that at a conference late last year, John Cook. He worked on the actual the technology which Facebook did use back a while ago to counter misinformation, but for some reason the project just evaporated and Facebook aren't using it anymore. And I noticed that I don't see that misinformation countering in Facebook as much anymore, and he doesn't know why it all disappeared. So maybe it's just not economically useful from a profit incentive point of view for Facebook to have this, because it annoys people enough that they'll start gravitating to other social media platforms like Truth Social or whatever. So again, the incentive landscape might sort of select away from this sort of behavior. The idea where you can have misinformation counters underneath the misinformation, so that people can look at it more objectively. So I'm worried that even though it's useful to have misinformation countering, the big social media platforms won't use it.
Right. I mean, I think it's a very difficult question to imagine what an AI monitoring system would be able to do with the question of misinformation. So if somebody says the cause of World War II was Western decadence, is that correct or incorrect, or just impossible to parse? And so, but I am very encouraged in this direction, because one of the things that's happened in the last year is that people began to recognize that LLMs, because they were based on prediction, were often inventing facts. And so a lot of research is being done now in combining systems that have logical reasoning, have spatial understanding, have a relationship to the actual text in the printed world, so that when you ask for a citation, it just doesn't make one up, it actually gives you a real citation. Or when you ask a question that involves some kind of physical reasoning, it actually can work through the steps to that. And I think we're making a lot of rapid progress in that direction. So the idea that then you could take those lessons and apply it to say, okay, if somebody says something that is, way outside the norm of reality, you can flag that. But it's going to be very difficult, and it's always going to be fraught with political conflict.
So yeah, reality filters. I mean, for good, we're talking about here. So do you think it's feasible for AI to have more of a large role in filtering out misinformation in the future? Do you think, are you in favor of this? I mean, forget about filter bubbles in a sense that where people just have opinions that are sort of reflecting their own all the time, surrounded by them, but having digital symbionts or digital twins sort of help you determine truth in the real world, to ground truth, including
I'm a quantitative sociologist, so I'm a sucker for any kind of quantitative approach to solving the problems of my daily life, like what movie to watch or whatever. So I'm constantly resorting and reviewing my IMDb queue and my, things like that. And I think so we used to rely on experts for a lot of these kinds of tasks, these filtering tasks. People who edit, people who curate our information environment, but increasingly we rely on algorithms. And personally, I think it's been a step up. I think editors and human editors and curators always had their own biases. But when you go to Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb's Metacritic score, they flag certain people as being legitimate film critics, and then they take the average of their scores and they show what the average of the general populace score is and things like that. I think that's way more useful information than just reading a review in the New York Times about what the top 10 movies of the year were or something like that. So yeah, I'm very excited about AI's tools to guide us through daily life. The ability to ask, in healthcare, in the United States, because we have such a screwy healthcare system, trying to choose a healthcare plan is monumentally complicated, and there are very few human experts to turn to. But it's pretty easy to imagine that you could train an AI to ask you the right set of questions to guide you to choosing a healthcare plan or to putting together a will. I purchased will creation software 25 years ago. And it asks you a series of questions and then it spit out your will. And so to have an AI version of those kinds of tasks. So these are the places where I've paid a lot of attention to over the years, is the automation of healthcare, the legal services, and now higher education.
Right. Yeah, I'm also worried about how it will be gamed in a sense.
Well, yes, this goes back to the not knowing what's real, is that I think there's going to be a lot of paranoia about, are these machines conscious? Do they have intents of their own? Or even if they don't, does Bill Gates have some kind of influence through these systems to determine our future, or whoever the boogeyman is? And because their actions are mysterious and opaque, I think conspiracy theories will increasingly be focused on them, and perhaps rightly. We really don't know what kind of influences they have in the world. But for me, trying to look for motivations and conspiracies is always less useful than just looking at profit. The recent firing of Sam Altman, I don't know that we know everything that was actually going on in that, but one of the things that was going on was a bunch of people who got really freaked out about pausing AI or stopping what they were doing for some period of time until they had a better handle on it. And Microsoft and Altman, who were like, no, let's full speed ahead. They're accelerationists. This is just going to be good for everybody. And that's partly a profit question. You know, there's Sam's trying to raise $7 trillion right now to create chips dedicated to AI architecture. You don't get to raise $7 trillion unless you have a pretty profitable set of propositions for people. So I think the biggest question here is where do people see profits to be made in how they're rolling these things out? And are we satisfied with a profit-designed, profit-aligned AI model, or do that may be, for instance, as you point out, manipulating our consumer choices in ways that we would not otherwise choose if we weren't being manipulated by that system? Or do we want to put various controls on? And I think the Europeans, as I said, have the better approach to this. They have definitely been focusing on what kind of controls they need.
Right. There's a market dynamic that does select for people who put the foot on the accelerator in some areas, right?
Right.
Now, some of these efforts end up, causing the people who put their foot down on the accelerator to crash and burn. But some of them speed ahead fast enough that they can they get the first mover strategic advantage. Now, even if somebody like Sam Altman or the leader of another company has good enough or pure enough opinions, reasonable enough opinions about AI safety, they can still at the same time think, well, if I don't get there first, then I don't have a say in how much AI safety is taken seriously. And so although in an ideal world, it would be great to slow down, the market dynamics create a situation in which if we don't speed up, then we may not end up with an aligned artificial intelligence at the end of this. And then, yes, so I'm worried that even those with the best of intentions are going to think that it's best to accelerate because of market dynamics.
Well, I think the other dimension of competition we have to think about is geopolitical competition. And of course, the Biden administration's CHIPS Act and the general decoupling from China over the last 2-3 years has meant that there's an increasing focus on whether China has a competitive AI marketplace or set of applications. I don't really believe that they're competitive to the Western ones yet, but they have been rapidly developing in that direction. And of course, they have a lot of folks to put towards these tasks. So, but the focus on TSMC in Taiwan, which makes a lot of the chips that a lot of this artificial intelligence runs on. So an attempt, but Japan is just investing like $5-6 billion in moving TSMC AI chip production to Japan, which should be more secure from Chinese invasion. And of course, the United States, we're building some of these plants. So there's a real geostrategic, geopolitical dimension to this. And there, I'm on the side of liberal democracies. So I think that we should be extremely critical of the way that China addresses human rights, and secondarily, the way that they use artificial intelligence and technology to abuse human rights. And we should we should put on the table that rapid innovation by the West will probably help us in a geopolitical competition with authoritarian regimes. And I'm on the side of that. But at the same time, within those constraints, we need to figure out what, even if we are a pro-innovation, pro-growth model with this stuff, what are the downsides that we want to make sure don't happen to us? Because those downsides could be as catastrophic for our geostrategic position as rapid success is. Right? If we had widespread social dislocation because of unemployment that was unaddressed by a strengthening of the welfare state, then that could be continue to contribute to our political polarization. I think it's already contributed to our polarization. You look at the impacts of automation in the 2010s, the areas that were hardest hit by automation job loss were also the areas where a lot of folks switched from Obama to Trump. So the support for far-right authoritarian, fascist, whatever you want to call it, solutions is in some ways already being keyed to the divide between college-educated workers who are generally more optimistic that they can make new technologies work for them, and blue-collar workers who are more pessimistic.
Fascinating. So, all right. So, do you, just a philosophical question, do you think there's a sense in which ethics can be grounded to real world phenomena like pain and suffering? Are they real enough to tether to ethics such that ethics cases out to address the problems of grounded phenomenon?
So we're going to go for another hour. Is that the? Just kidding. Because that's a pretty fundamental
very
question.
Important topic, James.
Look, I am in terms of meta ethics, I'm kind of an existentialist. I don't think that there's any clear objective ethics. I prefer a Western liberal democratic consequentialist ethics that takes account of what I consider to be the pinnacle of human civilization thus far, which is Northern European social welfare states. They have long life expectancies, they're relatively happy, there's a minimum of violence, there's a minimum of child mortality, any metric you want to look at, those societies, Japan, Australia, to some extent, Canada, places like that, have achieved a pretty good balance. And Sam Harris uses that same observation to say things like, then therefore it's objectively true that the good is whatever moves us towards those things. I don't think I can say that. I don't think anybody can really say that. The Taliban doesn't agree with that. China doesn't agree with that. A lot of the world doesn't agree with that, right? They think that there are other things that are more valuable than these other accomplishments that I would point to. And so I don't think that there's any real solution to the meta-ethics question. It's an existential choice that we all have to hopefully make. However, once we make ethical choices, then I do think that those can be coded into software in various ways, not in the crude ways that we used to imagine, like the three rules of robotics from Asimov, which he wrote just to show that they really don't work, but more as, and this is where AGI comes back in, is that even if AGI is a philosophical zombie, really doesn't have consciousness and can't really be said to have empathy for human suffering or the plight of mortality or whatever we think, having a consciousness would imbibe, it could be a really excellent ethics advisor. But you would have to tell it what kind of ethics, right? There'll be a Sharia version, there'll be a Chinese communist version, there'll be a Russian Putinist version, and you will want the version that fits best with your ethical intuitions. And maybe we'll see. Maybe we'll have a global ethics robot competition and see which one comes out on top, and we can, have a league table every year.
Right. So there is a sense in the alignment problem, and that ties in with AI ethics and AI safety, where we want AI to align to the best of our intentions. But then if the best of our intentions aren't actually aligned with anything objective in the world, then they could be basically anything. It sounds like a big, postmodern stage play where everybody's just doing some form of like, I don't know, some form of like, dance, right? This is my ethical dance, which is better than your ethical dance because, hey, look, I can wave my arms around faster. And look, there's more people dancing in this way than there are people dancing over there in that way. So to me, there does seem to be some sense in which we need to account for real world phenomena, like how much suffering a certain regime produces in their population and how much well-being can we achieve by, this strategy or that strategy, rather than, people comparing performance art.
Well, again, just saying that you think an ethics should maximize human well-being, that's a choice, right? That's not a choice everyone makes. If you think that being in alignment with Quranic or Vedic values is really the highest way for human beings to achieve whatever, regardless of whatever measures of well-being there are, then you would come up to those conclusions. But I don't think that we're going to have any consensus about what kind of ethics are best. And I don't think that robots will necessarily be able to adjudicate that for us. But I do think that they will be better ethicists than we are. They'll be able to point out our own ethical inconsistencies and push us towards our own ethical ideals.
Right. So AI will be more moral than us. Nice.
Hopefully. I mean, that's part of the argument of
I kind of
weaponized.
lean in that direction.
That's one of the arguments around weaponized AI is if you, Ron Arkin is famous for this argument that a weaponized autonomous robot could be given the rules of war and have the sensory acuity and rapid reflexes and the freedom from human failings, like getting pissed off at the people who are shooting at you, to not commit war crimes. And I think that that's right. You know, and it's just like the autonomous car question right now. You don't want to be measuring autonomous cars about whether they ever kill somebody. You want to measure them about whether they kill more people than human beings driving cars kill people, right? And the point at which the autonomous cars kill fewer people, that's progress, even if they're still killing people. So,
assuming we favor the performance art of AI not killing people, or that, you know, less death is better than more death, right? Yeah. So, yeah, so you've mentioned before that, you know, the debate around AI ethics versus safety is moot. What do you mean there?
Well, I just think that things have advanced so quickly this year that I see people, and I, you know, the participants in any of these debates have other things going on. But, you know, for instance, Timnit Gebru, she used to be on the ethics board at Google, quit, became one of the most prominent critics of the AI safety people for basically gaslighting society about the advent of superintelligence when really the problems were all racist algorithms. And I just, Timnit has not been as vocal in recent years. And I think a lot of the people in that domain are beginning to recognize that they're on a losing side here, arguing against the rapidity with which AI is going to be you know, challenging all our assumptions is a losing bet. So I do think that that's more or less a moot issue. And really the debate now is between those of us who want any kind of regulation versus the accelerationists, because Mark Andreessen really threw down his gauntlet, and this term accelerationism has now been picked up by a lot of Silicon Valley types to mean just typical anti-regulatory libertarian ideology, except with a technological flourish that AI is going to solve all our problems in the future.
Right, yeah, so there's the portfolio of possible futures that if we're sort of distributing credence amongst possible futures, we still need to take into account the idea that AI may come slow or AI may be extremely fast and all sorts of points in between. So yeah, I don't really buy into the idea that you know, anybody can really make accurate predictions about the future of AI. To me, it looks as though it's happening really fast, and I don't see very strong reasons to believe that it'll happen very slow, except for maybe, you know, a nuclear war and then less research into AI afterwards. So yeah, so given the fact that we should be really distributing our credence over a variety of possible futures, we should be taking everything into account, not just saying, hey, their opinion is objectively wrong about it being slow or fast.
Right. Yes. I mean, this is the huge problem with futurism. I first got involved in futurism when I was a teenager. My dad got me a subscription to the Futurist Society magazine, The Futurist. And I was reading a lot of science fiction. And I became a sociologist partly because I thought, well, if we could just quantify all the relevant things in society, then we could predict where all this is headed, and you know, we could, you know, have a perfect social science, like the Foundation series, you know, psychohistory. But I think the closer we get to, you know, this point, the less and less enthusiasm people have about predictions. I mean, when I first started my job at UMass Boston, we'd gone through 5 years of rapid growth. And everyone was predicting, oh, well, linearly will just continue to, you know, we'll be 50,000 students by the time we get here. and it didn't happen because things change. No one expected COVID. We could have a nuclear war. Climate change is going to be dramatically changing our situation. I do think I take Kurzweilian techno-optimism a little bit seriously, in that when we do look back through a lot of the cataclysmic changes, that they haven't really affected the rapidity of technological acceleration in ways that we might expect. World wars and things like that. World wars can be actually accelerators of technological innovation. So I don't think that that's necessarily going to do it, but we do face unprecedented challenges in this century that could be existential. And of course, if they're existential, they're also going to affect artificial intelligence progress.
So you've mentioned bias and de-biasing in algorithms to maximize profit. And other things to maximize profit, like weaponizing and all that sort of stuff. So how can people, I guess the question might be, how can companies maximize profit, but also maximize ethics, or maximize sort of what we think is the good life?
Well, I've been a subscriber to Consumer Reports my entire life. And the philosophy of Consumer Reports, which started back in the 30s, is not to say, that capitalism's bad, but that capitalism has to be held to account for whether they're really selling us what they say they're selling us, right? Or what the quality is of what they're selling us. And so the Consumer Reports model has always been, let's figure out how to test everything and then issue some kind of independent third-party adjudication. Now, artificial intelligence may take that role in the future of gathering all the consumer reviews. There used to be a site called Consumer Search, which would list every review. If you wanted a refrigerator, it would list every review of refrigerators in the last year that they would find on the internet. And then you could read through the different reviews and see what they said. But now you could just do the same thing with artificial intelligence. Say, show me what you think, based on the current reviews, the best X is. And so, yeah, I think we're going to make a lot of progress in that way.
Oh, definitely. I hope so. And do you think this will feed back into balancing the kind of innovation that people would like to see in their products, including the want for them to be safe, like the balance of innovation and safety?
Well, innovation, so just a meta point here. I think artificial intelligence is pretty good at predicting what among the existing options of things that you like. But I don't think that planners or artificial intelligence have ever been very good at predicting what people will like, what kinds of new, truly innovating in the market. Now, we may get artificial intelligence that gets trained on innovation and becomes great innovators as well. But I think that we have to expect more in terms of the kind of rationalization of our consumer behavior than we do in terms of its coming up with all the new stuff that we hopefully want. But we may be surprised in that domain too. I'll just have to see. But I think that one of the problems, and a second meta point, is that one of the problems with capitalism is if you had perfect information, you also eliminate profit, right? So to the degree to which an internet marketplace mediated by artificial intelligence eliminates all the information gaps that allow people to make profit, then it could have a dramatic effect on markets.
So where's the incentives for the big companies to create these AIs if it means their profit margins might be lower?
Well, I don't think it'll necessarily mean their profit margins will be lower, but your average consumer goods seller or seller of services, when I go to a doctor now, I can look up that doctor's medical complaints and how well they've been ranked in 12 different healthcare service ranking Yelp type systems, So I think it'll have an impact on other domains, not necessarily on the big tech firms, though. Right.
So if we're to have AI that's sort of some sort of governor that helps manage markets to maximize well-being, that sounds like a good thing, but won't they need to know more about us? To what degree will they need to know about our personal biases, our personal wants, our personal likes and impulses, to then individualize nudges towards products which better service our individual needs.
Right. Well, I don't miss getting as much physical spam mail as I used to, and I think one of the reasons is that it's too expensive, and so it's electronic good for the environment. But the second reason is that we are increasingly served personalized. One piece of spam mail I did get was to get swag with my family name on it, Hughes. So they had some kind of algorithm that said, well, whatever name these people have, last name, will send them an advertisement for swag with their name on it. And that's a pretty simple-minded example, but it's personalized. It's more relevant to me than if I just got a general flyer that said you could buy swag with a name on it. So I think the degree to which things are personalized is both an advantage for the consumer and to some extent the citizen. I mean, I don't need to be seeing, there's a guy with a similar name on a similar street address nearby. Whenever I get his mail, it's from the National Rifle Association. I don't need to be getting that, and then I'm glad the National Rifle Association doesn't email everybody indiscriminately. I don't want to see that stuff. So I think there are certain advantages, but obviously as we talked about earlier, there's this problem of kind of nudging and the influencing of people's behavior, and that's even a bigger problem in the political space. The Cambridge Analytica scandal in Facebook in 2016, although I don't really think it moved the needle very much, but what freaked people out was that theoretically what they were trying to do could have been very impactful, which was to use psychodemographic profiles of people. I think they actually asked them a series of questions to get the psychodemographic profile, but to use these psychodemographic profiles to figure out what kind of propaganda they should be served. And the degree to which we go down that road, yes, people will be very manipulated. Right.
So there's a trade-off between privacy rights and the effectiveness of an AI's ability to target our individual preferences and send us the right kind of ads, or tailor meta reviews more accurately so that we can better make choices. And I'm annoyed with the sorts of ads that I get. I'm not sure about you. I know in the past, like you've mentioned a long time ago, that the ads that you get alongside social media have just been annoying and not relevant. So do you think it's getting any more relevant and less annoying?
Well,
and would you give up your privacy for it to become less annoying?
Cory Doctorow has been promoting a phrase for the last year, enshittification, and by which he means that all monopolistic information services like Facebook and whatnot have a tendency to go down the crapper because of the balance of profit. And I've certainly noticed that with Facebook. I mean, basically once Trump lost the 2020 election, I stopped using Facebook. I was principally using it for propaganda purposes, to promote democracy. But once I came back to it just to see what was happening there, it's full of crap now, at least from my feed. I don't know what you guys are getting. But yes, I would like it to be more personalized if it's possible. If the only people who want to communicate with me are sketchy folks who want to be my girlfriend, then that's not as useful as what it could be. Maybe there's nobody who really wants to communicate with me. Maybe I'm beyond marketability.
How do we design a system that uses our personal data effectively to help us get exactly what we want? Well, exactly. Near enough to what we want, but also protects our privacy. What's the right trade-off? I mean, do you think that that'll happen? Are you confident that we'll have a system in the future that will be able to make these kinds of trade-offs, accurate enough trade-offs, but without their a company profit motive getting in the way?
Turns out there's an international organization of lawyers who work on privacy issues. And I spoke at their conference last year, specifically on a Buddhist approach to these questions. And what I said was that, Buddhism is less concerned about the protection of the self. That a lot of our concerns about privacy are predicated on the notion that we could all be completely autonomous individuals in society. And I don't think that's possible. And when people try to excise themselves from the information sphere, I mean, yes, it may be harder to Google them, but it's very, very hard to really, not have a presence, not have a digital footprint in the world. So I gave up on that a long time ago, and I basically, I'm a Google boy, and I use Android and blah, blah, blah. I know that Google knows more about me now than anybody should. And I just have to hope that the privacy restrictions in place and the various assurances are going to work. Otherwise, if Trump takes over and uses the DOJ to subpoena all the Google records, then I'm in deep doo-doo. So we'll just have to see.
Yeah, I mean, James Cassio spoke a lot about this in interviews I've had with him, and his idea of joining the chorus and joining the participatory panopticon, if I said it correctly. Kind of fun and poetic, but I mean, he really did highlight some important issues there. If we disconnect from the chorus, the online chorus, then we're really missing out on a lot of the boons of current technological environment.
I mean, I've also been a prepper, so I understand the impulse. I live on 40 acres here in rural Connecticut, and I have a big garden, and
40 acres
panels. Yeah. So, I mean, I have definitely
You're going to need robots, James, to
Well, I'd love to have robots too. They can till the fields after the apocalypse. But I think, yeah, I mean, I have a sympathy with the idea of trying to go off the grid and being, independent of the overstate. But I just don't think it's really possible anymore. So, yeah.
So, okay, so we've got AI alignment, and we've got corporate and government profit prerogatives and control prerogatives. So AI alignment then becomes a political question. What's the political question? How would you cash this out?
Well, there's the political question about who is pro and anti artificial intelligence to begin with. And as I said, I think there's accumulating evidence that this is correlated with higher education. The people with higher education have been, perhaps wrongly, more enthusiastic about emerging technologies in general, AI in particular, and that working blue-collar people are more suspicious that any technological innovation is going to be bad for them because somebody else is going to make better use of it than they do, and it might lose them their job. So I think there's that political dimension of it, and that is an underlying factor in a lot of the other political polarization that we see. Then there's the politics of the corporate lobbying and tug of war over the regulation of these models. And as I said, we saw a relatively weak, although I'm glad that they did what they did at the AI summit at the White House, but it was a relatively weak response compared to what Europe had been proposing. And on the other end, you see China with a completely different model. Xi Jinping has been cracking down on his big tech people because they were becoming rivals to state power. So, Jack Ma and other folks, one toe out of line, you disappear. And then he also instituted things like Chinese kids can only play 1 hour video games a night, only on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And everybody has to log in with their real ID onto the internet so that they know who's doing what. And of course, the censorship regime, the surveillance regime, and so forth. So I think we have the different models of AI regulation that people are going to attempt to apply out here, the kind of opt-in, non-mandatory regime that the Biden administration pitched, the more regulatory regime that the EU is attempting to adopt with DSA and DMA and the others, and then the Chinese totalitarian models. And between those, I have my clear preference. But so that's the politics at that level. But as we said at the top, this is really applicable to artificial general intelligence, the development of tools that can reasonably substitute for human labor in a wide variety of domains, including physical labor. It doesn't apply to artificial superintelligence or to self-aware intelligence, whatever that might come to mean, because those are really novel and unpredictable situations and potentially catastrophic.
Right. Before if you've got time, and before I've opened this up to the floor for a couple of people here who might want to ask some questions.
Yeah, there's been lots of conversation.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything more about AGI and geopolitics? Because you've covered a lot there, but I don't know if you want to mention anything about Biden's CHIPS Acts or the TSMC in Taiwan and the ASML in the Netherlands and Chinese AI ambitions.
Well, just that I think the physical infrastructure that we're talking about, I mean, you could run some of these models potentially on your cell phone. So it may be that the need for dedicated chips is less than we think, but the higher end chips that a lot of this work has been done on is really concentrated in terms of the physical industry. ASML in the Netherlands, I think they produce 90% of the chip fabrication equipment, something extraordinary in the world that produces high-end chips. And then TSMC had 80%, 60% of the world market in terms of these high-end chips in Taiwan. So the vulnerability of our supply chains, we already saw during COVID. And if there was a Chinese attack on Taiwan, potentially destroying TSMC, we would have a serious bottleneck around the world for some period of time. So I think those are the geopolitical things I was talking about there. But I thought it was also interesting that Sam Altman was going to the Gulf states to try to pitch the $7 trillion AI chip manufacturing plan to the Gulf states. It's like, what's the motivation there? Anyway, I won't talk about Sam, but I would rather not be more entangled with the Gulf states. That's a problem all unto itself. But yeah, I think you put in the notes here, NVIDIA and Jeff Bezos. Yeah, the humanoid robots. I'll just close with that. I think the really exciting stuff about humanoid robots is that they are being empowered partly by the rapid advances in artificial intelligence and other domains. And if they start to be as efficient, this recent video, I think it was from the Tesla Optimus Lab. But anyway, this recent video about humanoid robots running a lab, that about 30 of them working autonomously in a lab, was really shocking, and beyond the Boston Dynamics type videos.
Fascinating. Well, thanks very much, James. It's been awesome having you here, but there are a couple of people who might want to ask some questions in the audience here. If you want to ask a question, just feel free to unmute and chime in.
I just wanted to say thank you, James. Michael Haynes speaking. My camera's gone on the blink, so I've been frozen for the whole session, but I've really enjoyed it. And my particular interest is in the universal basic income, and just like your thoughts on an approach that we're pitching to the Australian government, which is to to do two things. One is to start really small, so just $10 a week, and increase over 5 or 6 years, so that we don't have to guess about what the social impacts or the impacts are on the labour market or on inflation. And it also gives time for the supply chain to adapt to the new pattern of demand. And I think Stanislav made the issue about money sort of having a time limit on it before you spend. I've got some concerns about that, Stanislav. One of the ways we're attempting to overcome the problem of just ever-increasing money supply is to do what sounds like an oxymoron, which is to target the universal basic income, and do that by paying it to everybody, but then recovering it through the tax system, including a specific app. That means that we give it to our richest people, to anybody, but each week, either through the group tax normal recovery, your employer would automatically take back some or all of your UBI in the week you're paid, or you would report it on an app. So the benefit of that is everybody gets it. On any week, your income, you don't have any income, you don't have to apply, you don't have to justify it. The UBI comes in and there it is. And then the final thing that we're looking at saying is we should use the UBI as a tool to balance the labour market, so that as jobs are lost, then you raise the UBI rate and people then make an individual choice. Well, at this level, given my current circumstances, I'm happy to live on it. And so we remove the idea that it's a basic income. It's actually an income to balance the labour market, so that if we do end up with having, fewer and fewer jobs, then the average living standard doesn't fall as a result, which would be the case if you just gave then everybody a basic income. So it means that we maintain the economy essentially operating at full capacity all the time, because by definition the labour market is in balance, but more and more people would be pursuing other things in their life instead of paid work. So that's a bit of a broad picture, I know, that I've just painted, James, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on those approaches.
I think that's great. I agree with everything you just said. I would also add the observation that one of the attractions of starting UBI small is that having a generous UBI is politically really hard. Having any UBI is hard already.
Yes.
Getting a small one has the huge advantage that once people start getting those checks, they will like getting those checks. And we see this from, they will see like in Alaska, which decided a long time ago to put their money into a general fund and distribute it a certain amount of profit every year. It's only a couple $1,000s, but no Republican has attempted to get rid of that.
Yes, absolutely.
So I do think there's a huge advantage there, and yes, it could grow. And as the if the stock market or wealth inequality, whatever, changes dramatically, then it could be expanded. And I do think it needs to be a complement to some of the other things we do. As I said, I don't believe in the advocacy of universal basic income as a replacement for every social welfare system. No. I think we need specialized systems for the disabled and for other services. So
and I agree with that. I'm with an organisation called Basic Income Australia, and that's the position we're pushing, which is the UBI really only works on the demand side in the market. We still need the government to, through regulation and direct provision, ensure the supply of education, housing, and the normal public services.
Exactly.
So anyway, it's been a fantastic talk. I have to go. So I just wanted to say thank you very much,
thanks,
James, and Adam,
thanks for
organising it.
And good luck with your work.
So
feel free to touch base with me in the future.
All right, James. Well, we've just put together a submission which has gone to the government in the last week. So I'd be very happy to send one to you, a copy to you, if I could get your email.
Sure, I'm a director at IEET.org.
Just a minute.
I can send you that.
Can you? All right. Thanks, Adam.
No problem.
Right. Thanks, James. So I have to go, but look, fascinating. Really appreciate it, and thanks again, Adam, for organising it.
Oh, absolutely.
Stanislav. Bye-bye.
Stanislav, did you have?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a really fascinating talk, and I listened with great interest. Practically, your book "Surviving the Machine Age," which was, if I remember well, 7 or 8 years ago published, is one of the fundamental books in the field, and I work in that field of we can say the robonomic economy for probably 10 years now. And that's why I also share this interest with you. And I also serve as the editor-in-chief of Robonomics, the journal of the automated economy.
I didn't make the connection. Oh, yeah, I love what you guys are doing with Robonomics. That's great.
Yeah. And also, yeah, I checked the website of the Institute for Ethics in Emerging Technologies, and I see that I also work with some of the people that are there, which is nice. I have a question about the time frame, because many of the forecasts about the future, how AI is going to take over the jobs, or when the introduction of universal basic income, or all these things, all of them do not mention one thing: when. Time. And time is crucial, because if we are talking about 10 years is one thing, if we talk about 50 is completely different story. And if these things happen in 200 years, the political support by the voters for any changes will quickly disappear. And as we heard, some of the changes from a legal point of view will need to take gradual step, like the introduction of universal basic income and others. So how pressing are these changes, and when are they going? How quickly are they going to happen in the future? Because sometimes we overestimate the speed, sometimes we underestimate it.
I'll tell you,
Thank you.
my doctoral dissertation was on the division of labor between doctors and nurses in hospitals. And my thesis, this is back in 1992. And my thesis was that artificial intelligence, or medical diagnostic systems, healthcare information systems, however you want to frame it, that those plus paraprofessional labor like nursing together would be able to take over a lot of the things that doctors were expected to do, because the doctors don't do them very well. They actually don't do diagnosis and therapeutic applications very well, but they definitely don't do patient education or, you know, post-discharge planning or any of the other things they're expected to do. So I thought, well, this is a slam dunk. You know, these systems already are demonstrating that you give a nurse access to this power, they do it better than the doctors. But it was not a slam dunk, right? Because doctors have a lot of power, and they get to determine how these tools get used, right? And they're not going to sign off on any use of these tools that threatens their occupation. And I think the general lesson from this is it's relatively easy to say, well, given this current trajectory of technological change, we're going to get artificial intelligence, like the Fry and Osborne model. We're going to get artificial intelligence that will be able to displace half of the labor market. But then the opposite end of it is like Graeber's analysis of bullshit jobs. It's like there are all kinds of jobs that aren't profitable for corporations to have right now that we have for all kinds of irrational reasons. I have a secretary I do not need, right? But I'm expected as a university administrator to have a secretary. That's the reason I have a secretary. I'm expected to, right? So, you know, I don't think that those things are going to change very quick. And that's what Kurzweilian technological projection never really takes account of is, you know, the AI, you know, the movie AI, where the people react to the robots by having gladiatorial combats where they smash them to bits. You know, if we have that kind of social backlash against technology, and especially from the occupations that feel most threatened, that are relatively powerful, I don't think we'll have as rapid adoption, or we'll have some kind of distorted adoption. You know, the powerless people, yeah, they'll get their jobs screwed, but the rich people won't. So I just don't think it's going to happen as rapidly as engineers expected on the basis of technical feasibility. But I can't, but even that is hard to predict in terms of a timeline, right? And that's what I was saying about futurism. I like what Kurzweil and people like Kurzweil try to do, but I don't know how seriously to take any of those timelines given the discontinuous advances that we've seen in other domains. Another example is CRISPR. You know, we thought that genetic editing, we started thinking about genetic editing in bioethics back in the 50s and 60s, and even earlier, before we understood what genes were. But we really didn't have technologies to do it until the 90s, and then we started to kill people with it, and then we thought, oh, this is going to take a really long time. And then CRISPR came along, and it's all, you know, it becomes an entirely different ball field. So and now with artificial intelligence, people are expecting more discontinuous out of left field scientific innovation. So I think it's a fool's game to try to predict any of this. And that's one of the reasons why I've always been very comfortable in the someplace between science fiction and actual public policy. It's like, I think we need to be talking about science fiction because we don't know when it might happen.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And if we can cooperate, it would be fantastic.
I would love to work with you on this robonomics issue. So yeah, drop me a line.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll send you an email.
Great.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
you very much.
A small little tangent to end things off. When do you think the automation of science, full spectrum automation of science, will be possible? Do you think AI is getting to a stage where it might be able to participate more fully instead of just doing glorified small molecule drug discovery, to do more bench work?
My daughter's a cell biologist, and every week I ask, okay, has it changed what you're doing yet? Has it changed what you're doing yet? And it hasn't for her yet. But one of the things that she's very concerned about is the automation of laboratory processes. That could happen very rapidly. It's already, I mean, people are already working on it, but doing 1,000 cell experiments on one big chip or something like that, microfluidics. So I think things are happening in the scientific domain. The open question is creative scientific thinking. When I try to talk to my daughter about that, she's like, yeah, and show me the scientists who are actually doing creative scientific thinking. There aren't as many Stephen Hawkings out there as we imagine. Most people are working at little pieces of problems. So.
All right. Well, it's been wonderful having you again, James, and thanks everybody that participated. I'm really interested in following up and seeing how this goes over the coming years. So maybe we'll have more of these discussions in the future, maybe a panel or two. So again, great work you're doing, James. And thank you so much for the audience participation. If you like this video, please subscribe and tell your friends.
And feel free to contact me at director@iet.org. And
indeed, yes. Yeah, and check the website out, IEET.org, and I'll put all this information, maybe not your email, but the web link in the description of this video.
Okay, great. Talk to you soon.